Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to today's IEEE-USA Livestream webinar, Ask the Experts, an open discussion with three independent consultants. Joining us today are three IEEE members from the IEEE-USA Alliance IEEE Consultants Network Coordinating Committee, Mike Benke, Will Kassenbaum, and Christopher Wilson. Today's webinar will be a different format from our usual webinars. We'll be having an open discussion with our audience, sending in questions they have about the consulting world, and our speakers will be answering them. If you have any questions for our presenters, please send them in the comment section of the live stream. I'll now pass it off to our speakers to introduce themselves, beginning with Mike. Welcome, guys.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, my name's Mike Benke. My background is I've been working in the electric power industry for about 35 years now. I started my career right out of school with a major electric utility here on the West Coast, where I'm still located. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. I left the utility and went to work for a vertically integrated wind energy company that developed wind plants and also manufactured wind turbines. So I worked for an equipment manufacturer for a while and was involved in a spin out of the power electronics piece of that wind company into a power electronics manufacturer for wind and solar applications. About 17 years into my career, that would have been about 2003, I decided to go into consulting with two partners. So we started a three-man firm and over a number of years built it up to about 35 employees. We were acquired by a European based consulting firm that wanted to make inroads in the U.S. in the areas that we were working in. So I continued working for them for another 3 years, and then decided to leave. And after my non-compete was up, myself and one of the original partners got back together, and we've been working as a two-man team ever since. So I've been working about half my career, 17 years, for others, and about the other half, the last 18 years, as an independent consultant. As far as my IEEE-USA involvement, I've been involved with AICNCC for about the past 2 years, and I've been a long time, more than 10-year member of the IEEE-USA Licensure and Registration Committee. So I'm happy to answer questions today about kind of the mechanics of starting a consulting firm, how you know you're ready, and anything else that comes up. So I'll pass it over to Will for his introduction now.
All right. Thanks, Mike. I'm Will Kassenbaum, and I think Mike and I both went to Purdue University. And so when I graduated back a few moons ago, I went to work for the Naval Air Warfare Center, one of the DoD labs here located in central Indiana, and worked there for many years until I ended up working for Hughes Aircraft and Raytheon. And then at some point I got the itch and I said, okay, we've got to go start a consulting firm. So I took 5 other, well, I guess there were 5 total of us that we took out, and we formed a consulting company, and we ended up doing a bunch of work and sort of got eaten up by a consumer electronics company that was involved in, some of you may have heard of Grace Note. And back in those days, we had developed a system that could control the big CD and DVD changers and identify all the discs and that sort of things. And, you know, it's part of that company, Grace Note, is still out there, and it identifies all the CDs and DVDs and things like that that you stick in devices like your computer. Past that, I ended up working on systems for robotic, for paint systems, where we could keep track of all the volatile organics and all that sort of stuff. And I went on to found a company working in growing algae to make nutraceuticals and pharmaceutical things. So I've started over all these years, we've started not only running the consulting company all along since about 1998, But we've started a number of companies. I think we're maybe up to about 10 right now that we've started. Some have been more successful than others, but many of them are still operating, or they've moved on to other niches. But even game stores and technology companies. The most recent one was involved in solar energy monitoring. So in microgrid, sort of the central control and monitoring of those microgrid systems. So I'm really a computer and electrical engineer rather than a power engineer, but I guess you get involved in all kinds of interesting things once you sort of get the itch to go out and start things and run things. You know, what we do best as engineers is learn, and so you just keep learning, you keep trying new things. And so anyway, as far as IEEE, I've been involved since the early 2000s in consultant networks, and in there sometime I got involved with the Alliance of IEEE Consultants Networks. I've been the chair of this group in the past, and I think in 2014 and 15, I was the vice president of career member services for IEEE-USA. In fact, I think, Mike, you were running the licensure committee at that time.
Yep.
So it's been a very interesting thing, and the networking and everything that goes along with IEEE is a big benefit to consulting and all the activities that you get yourself involved in as an entrepreneur. So with that, I'd love to answer any questions you may have about running or starting your consultants, or either your consulting group or your company or your independent consulting practice. And I can give you tips and ideas about sort of all the little things that not only the technical side, but the business side. Chris?
Okay, well, really happy to be here. This is a great opportunity. So a little bit about my career. After leaving university, I spent about 10 years in the aerospace world developing sensors, sensor systems. Then around the end of the 80s or so, we'd won the Cold War, and that didn't seem to be a great business. So I was in a company that actually had a large automotive business as well. And so we decided to take all these great sensors we developed for aerospace and apply them in the automotive world, which was, you know, quite a transition. In automotive, everything's about cost and reliability. And so did that transition and spent about 20 years working for various companies on automotive safety systems, the sensors, and data processing, from collecting data from vehicles as they became connected, which was part of what I did. You know, how do we learn about the environment vehicles are driving in? And that's been really important for automated vehicles, semi-automated vehicles, and a lot of the safety systems that are out there today. So I developed those systems, worked some with other companies, some with government on how to regulate, how to validate these sorts of systems. Then about around the time I was 50, I sort of had, you know, my last job change was coming up, and it was, do I want to stay doing the stuff for the rest of my career or try consulting, which had always been an interesting topic. So I decided to go into consulting and became an independent consultant. I have done sort of 4 types of things as an independent consultant. Some is just technical consulting, and that's been partly for startups, partly for larger established companies. I've done some sort of marketing consulting, and this tends to be for startups that have some idea they want to sell to an OEM, and having worked at OEMs, I can tell them, you know, how to package it, what are the important things, you know, how to say stuff. So maybe marketing, but also technical, you know, what sort of technical specs are important. I've done work with the government, mostly around policy of automated vehicles, semi-automated vehicles, vehicle safety types of initiatives. I've also done work as an expert witness in this space. So that's mostly around patents in this vehicle safety, vehicle communications, remote diagnostic space. So really interested in answering any questions there. I've been involved with IEEE for probably 10 years. I became involved mostly when I became an independent consultant. IEEE offers a lot of great benefits for consultants, and insurance and help with some contract. There were some example stuff there, as well as contacts. So one of the things I joined was the Consultants Network of Silicon Valley, which is one of the IEEE consulting networks. I'm currently chair of that organization, but that's been a great boon to my career, from talking to other consultants as well as just networking, because I don't have a water cooler to go meet people at anymore. I've been involved in this organization for the last, I guess about 3 years. So looking forward to answering any questions that we can. I think that's ready for questions, I guess.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Welcome again, guys. So without further ado, we're gonna turn it over to questions from our audience. To everyone watching today's live stream, again, if you have a question for a specific presenter, please do mention that in your comment/question. And so, guys, here's our first question from Daryl. Daryl asks, to any expert, how did you get your first client? So I guess we'll go from Mike to Will to Chris.
Okay. Well, for me, both consulting companies I started, the answer was the same. My first client was the company I left. So the key there, I mean, if you leave your employer on good terms, don't burn bridges, and you've been doing valuable work for that employer, when you leave and you explain to them, hey, I want to start this consulting company, explain it in a way that that doesn't, like I said, burn bridges or bash your previous employer. They're going to have a hole. They're going to have a talent hole for a while before they can go and fill your slot. Go and recruit someone to backfill you. So in both cases, my previous employer was my first client, and once you do that, hopefully you're in a position with that consulting engagement where you're dealing with your previous employers, either customers or suppliers. And, just you mentioned to them, I used to work for XYZ company, but I decided to start a consulting company because whatever your because reason is. And you'd be surprised, as long as you're showing value for your previous employer, that employer's customers and suppliers will recognize that, and you kind of things start snowballing. They're aware of your availability to do work for them as well. So that's how, for both consulting companies that I started, that's exactly what happened.
So I'll chip in. I agree wholeheartedly. That is very, very important. And part of the mission of a consultant is to build a corral of customers that are repeat customers. And so they tend to come and go, and you will lose one, you need to add somebody else to the corral as you go along. My first customer, when we started our consulting company, we didn't quite realize that we'd created our business model was apparently seedless orange. So we had a bevy of little talent, and we found a company in our hunting that needed a whole bunch of talent. And so we essentially formed the engineering department of their startup for a while. And so that company we went into as a group, and became part of that company. And it grew from being a company of about 7 or 8 up to being maybe about 40 or 45 people. And before we went out and sort of pulled ourselves out and went on to do other things. So in this case, it wasn't for my previous employer, but it was a good connection nonetheless. And I went on to have several more consulting assignments with that company over the years. So that's an important concept of every relationship that you build. Hopefully it'll come back and you can recycle it, and you'll have new assignments in the future if you do a good job.
Yeah, I had a little different experience there. And I thought I'd lined up some customers among people I was working with and so forth. And, it seemed like it was good to go. And I took the leap and found out I hadn't crossed all the T's and so forth. And you can't do that. As an employee, you're sort of limited in how far you can go in those discussions. And so I had, from that perspective, gone a little prematurely, but it worked out pretty well. What I found made it for me was I put the word out to friends and people I knew. I made a big deal of I'm now a consultant. And it turned out that somebody I'd worked with before who had actually done some consulting work on his own too, heard this and, essentially came to me and said, here's an interesting job. Do you want to help me with this? Or do you want to take these things? So for me, that was the big marketing thing, was really just putting the word out on LinkedIn, among friends, emails, of just I was available. And, people were looking and they knew to come to me. So that's what got me going.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, Daryl, for your question. And this question is for anyone. So Eric asks, I've recently started a single-person consulting company as an LLC. Do you have any suggestions for purchasing insurance? And anyone can feel free to pitch in.
I'll jump in. I mean, you guys may have suggestions too, but I've gotten liability insurance, professional liability insurance, and that sort of thing, actually through the IEEE. There's Mercer and the connections we've made through IEEE-USA. You can get a good policy, and they can provide policies all over the country at a good price.
Yeah, I think, well, there's the professional liability or the errors and omissions part of it. You're also going to need just a general liability policy, and normally, if you're starting out as a small 1, 2, 3-man company, the cheapest way to do that is to get something called a business owner's policy, and that includes some general liability, not errors and omissions, but if you go to a customer site and either cause damage to yourself or their property or one of their employees, of course, they're going to want your insurance and not theirs to cover that. And it'll include some things like if your computer equipment from your office gets stolen or damaged. Usually includes like some rental car coverage as well. But that business owner's policy is pretty inexpensive. I think my 2-man company right now, we pay somewhere around $1,000 a year for that. And the way that I found that both times was I went to my insurance agent for my house and my car insurance, which in my case was State Farm. I went to my State Farm agent and I said, hey, I'm starting this consulting company, and I don't know if State Farm does this kind of stuff, but can you either provide me a quote for a business owner's policy or refer me to someone who can? And in both cases, what ultimately ended up doing was State Farm didn't want my business, which was fine. But like engineers, the insurance agents have their own network, and she was able to put me in touch with somebody that specialized in small business insurance. And so that's how we got our general liability. So I would recommend that. And then on the liability, errors and omissions, the professional liability that Will mentioned. Yeah, when I first started out, we went through the IEEE program as well. And the advantage to doing that is they're used to dealing with new consulting companies. They know what you're doing. They kind of know what their risks are going in. What I found was once we built up the business to over a few years, and our revenues went up and our employee numbers went up, we were able to get that. All of a sudden, other insurers became interested in our business. So I found out that the IEEE wasn't the lowest cost. We were able to get similar coverage for lower costs from others. But it's a great place to start because, like I said, they understand this. It's not scary to them.
Yeah, I had pretty much the same experience. I remember talking to State Farm, and they didn't seem to be interested in me as a small business. But I did get the insurance through IEEE, through Mercer there, and that worked out well. I believe the issues at the time were this a lot of people didn't know who I was, and I didn't know who I was at that time. I didn't really know what I was going to be doing. So Mercer was quite helpful in that. I don't think they're the least expensive, but they were really easy to work with, and easy to get going. And it's one of the things when you're starting a consulting business, you don't want to spend a lot of time worrying about that. Just do it, get it over with, and get back to consulting.
Yeah. I'll say one more thing about this question too. As Eric, as you get involved in different activities, doing your marketing, and as you will to be doing for your consulting firm, if you attend like some of the local, in your neck of the woods, I'm sure there are probably entrepreneur groups or that are getting together to talk about new companies or things that are going on. All of those kinds of groups, or a consultants network if you have one nearby. Quite often those groups attract people, not only investors, but they attract insurance agents, and they attract business advisors and financial people. And so just make sure you introduce yourself to the people that are around those things. And you may find that you encounter some of the people that are really active in those fields in your neck of the woods. And those usually are great connections that can provide you insurance products and all kinds of services as you go through your career.
Great, thank you guys. So based off your answers, I think we can all agree that insurance is definitely pretty important, especially probably even more so for smaller businesses or people getting started in their business or careers as well. So,
and it's more complicated getting it than you think it's going to be.
And I had some jobs that required the insurance too. So some will, some won't. I think I've only had a few that required it. They tended to be government type of contracts.
Yeah, and your customers sometimes will push you and require. We'll contract you, but you need $1 million of insurance, and we need the certificate here in my little hand. And the other thing, if it gets more complicated and you're building a product, then you'll need product liability insurance. And then, of course, in all of these situations, you may get involved in having to do audits and things like that. Did we have the right amount of income, or less, or more? Do we owe more money? Anyway.
Right.
Well, general rule, and that this is the broader thing. As an independent consultant, finding people you trust to talk to about stuff you don't want to learn about, such as insurance. Find a good insurance guy who can help you with all this stuff.
Yeah, you need advisors. Yeah, and these people will become your advisors.
Yeah, that's important. And to get back to one of the themes for me, it's let people know what you're doing. You're an independent consultant. You're looking for insurance. People will come to you. People really want to help you, but you got to let them know what you need. And that's sort of been a theme throughout my consultancy.
Absolutely. And also just another quick update regarding insurance. So Lynn Coblin, who is affiliated with IEEE and also with Mercer, she has just made a comment that IEEE liability program now has 2 different products that can take larger risks than years ago. So Mercer will broker for you if your needs exceed the products. So thank you, Lynn, for that update. And thank you, Eric, for your question. Next question from John. What is the best way to go from a one-man firm to having employees?
I can't speak to that one.
Everything begins with a customer. It's the problem often is this balancing act, right, between having enough work to employ people. If you hire people before you have enough work, I hope you have a big wallet, right? So it's always easier to start with working with people maybe where you're each helping each other. Maybe you've got another consultant that you can team with on bigger jobs. But if you get to the point where you're consistently got enough work that you could bring 2 or 3 guys, maybe some younger folks on, and you can train them in the activity set that you're doing, that's very helpful. But you got to master that marketing side so you keep the hopper full.
Yeah, the other thing I would say, and this is going to vary a lot from state to state. I happen to live in a very bureaucratic state right now in California. Once you take the step of hiring your first employees, all of a sudden the administrative burden dealing with the state goes up. So it's not something to do lightly. But once you sort of go through the hoops you need to go through for that first employee. You want more employees to kind of sort of amortize that hassle over a larger potential revenue base. So the other advice was kind of along the lines of what Will said. You may want to start teaming with another consultant. My first company that the three of us started, I think it was like employee number 10 before we hired someone who we didn't have experience with. So employees are a risky business, and if you can draw in people that you've had years, or in our case decades of experience with as employees, that's going to make your life a lot easier.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, guys. And thank you, John, for your question. This next question from Vince. Interested to know if you find an absolute need to have a professional engineer's license, or is it simply an advantage?
Let me take that one, because I have background with that both in IEEE, and I also do a lot of work with the National Council of Engineering Examiners. The answer to this is it really depends on what state you're in. It depends on what your state laws are. I think if you're working in the power business, it's sort of, it would be career limiting not to have a PE license. So if you're working outside of the power industry, it's probably a bigger question. Now, the way our licensure laws, the Engineering Act in California is written, there's this thing called an industrial exemption, where if you're not providing engineering services to the public, say you're working for a manufacturer, you're designing products, you're exempt from having a PE license. And in California, at least, if you're a consultant to a company, that would have this industrial exemption, you're exempt as well. But I know that there are other states that are much more rigid about that, where if you're going to go and offer engineering services even to a manufacturing company that's building products as opposed to public infrastructure, you still need it. So you really need to go, and whatever state you're in, Vince, you need to go and look at the Engineering Act and see whether or not what you're proposing to do requires a state license.
Yeah, I think I'd add to that. I think it depends a lot on what your field is. I look at something. So I don't have a PE license. I think people in the software world in general, there really is no license for being a software engineer. So, if you're doing civil engineering, you probably ought to have a license. If you're just doing software, you don't need to. For my work in the automotive space, I don't really think there is a license there. Now, so it depends on what it is you're consulting about. Now, one thing I have heard people getting into trouble with is if you advertise yourself as an engineer, you need to have a license, or somebody comes after you. I don't know who it is, but I know people without engineering licenses, such as myself, who have, engineer in their job titles, and my employers would say I was an engineer, but I don't have a license. And so if I advertise engineering, there's people out there that get mad at me, and people like me. So just beware of that.
Yeah, it's the state boards. But Chris, in your case, you're advertising yourself as a consultant, not as an engineer,
Yes.
correct? Yeah. So.
Yeah. So.
Awesome. Yeah. Great. Thank you, guys. And thanks, Vince, for your question. We have another audience member asking, when do you have to think about setting up as an LLC versus just being a 1099 contractor? If anyone has some insight.
I'll take a swing. So there's one of the things that you get into is if you're a 1099 subcontractor, you're essentially selling hours. And there's kind of, let's call it a life cycle about a consulting firm or a consulting career, right? So you're starting, in the perspective that maybe you have a full-time job and you're doing some 1099 work on the side, maybe some extra money, or maybe then you go and you work as a 1099 subcontractor for another company. This is getting harder to do in California for these days. But essentially, there's a fine test of whether you're an employee or whether you're actually a subcontractor. Well, if you set up an LLC in your own separate firm, you're going to have a consulting contract between your firms, right? There's an advantage in setting up the LLC in that it has limited liability. It's separate from you. Your 1099 work is really just you. It's not in a company's name. And so getting insurance and doing all the things that you do as a business to separate your business affairs from your personal affairs is really kind of an important thing. If something goes wrong, that business entity might be attacked, but it shouldn't be able to pierce all the way through to you, which might not be the case if you're just a 1099 subcontractor.
You mentioned it in passing there, but here in California, there's been this AB5, which you may have heard about, which is trying to get all the Uber drivers as employees of Uber. Now, they're 1099 people, and I think part of the reason that they're claiming they're employees is because they don't have businesses doing this stuff. And there are bills such as AB5 that are coming out at the national level, and IEEE tracks them. Russ Harrison has done some interesting talks on that, who's the IEEE Washington, D.C. guy. But having that LLC really shows you're trying to be a contractor and not a employee. So it's helpful for that reason, probably going to be more so going forward. But I think, as Will said, when you're serious, when you really want to be a consultant, do the LLC.
Well, it's not difficult. You can be a single person disregarded entity LLC. So it really all reports to your Schedule C. So you don't have a separate tax filing. And so there's things like that. If you want to grow to if you want to do what Mike did and grow your company to 30, 40 people, then you need a multi-person LLC probably that's going to have its own either partnership return or a Chapter S type return. Probably a partnership return, but that's just a matter of sophistication, I would say. And if you get big enough, if you need investment and you're going to build products and things like that, you might be an LLC, but you also might consider becoming a full C corp.
Yeah, and I think the cost of becoming an LLC was pretty minor. I think there's a state tax in California of $800 a year, but other than that, it's
75 in Indiana.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same for an S corp in California, which is how my current business is organized. There's this franchise tax of like you said, Chris, $800 and something a year.
Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you, guys. And yes, everyone, as Chris had mentioned before, so our IEEE-USA Director of Government person has spoken extensively about the AB5 legislation in his IEEE-USA Washington updates, which you can find on our Facebook and YouTube pages. So again, thank you for the insight, guys. Our next question, how will CMMC affect individual consultants?
I have no idea what that FLA is, so I'm gonna have to pass on that one.
Yeah, Locke, if you can, thank you for the question to specify what that means. We can follow up on that question. So in the meantime, next question. What are the logistics for starting a single person consulting company? And what is the best way to secure your first contracts in case you already have a subject matter expert? We'll give you guys just a minute to take that in.
Yes, computing. So, it's very easy to set up a single person consulting company. These days, I think it's always good to meet attorneys and get advisors and all that stuff, but it's also $400 an hour, right? So I joke that every time you call an attorney, you get a house payment. But there are things like LegalZoom if you want some help doing them. If you're willing to dig in, like many of us might be, you can find all kinds of resources to figure out how to organize an LLC yourself, and you can file it yourself and just pay the filing fees and all that. Now, will you have all the perfect things in your organization organizational documents, maybe not, but you can fix those later if you need to. So I wouldn't, Gary Blank used to say, what do you need to get in business? Do you need business cards? No. Do you need an office? No. Do you need an LLC? No. What do you have to have? There's only one thing you have to have, and that's called a customer. Okay. So, and you sort of get to this in the end of your question, if you already have a subject matter expert. So if you're a subject matter expert in some field, you probably know what's moving and shaking in that corner of tech world, right? So you need to go hunting. You need to make friends and introduce yourself to the people that are in that area that maybe have work that you're aware they have contracts, they have needs, and see where you can help. So marketing is one of the hardest things. Marketing ourselves is one of the hardest things we do as consultants. And you sort of have to imagine that you're going to spend half of your time trying to introduce yourself and talk to and engage with all kinds of people that you could potentially get contracts with. And it's going to be a seed planting operation. You plant seeds and water them and plant more seeds and water those. And eventually something will grow somewhere and you'll get those contracts. And hopefully you'll get a corral of customers where, as the years go along, you keep getting calls and you have to keep watering those plants, as it were, so that's sort of how that works. And so sometimes it takes a while at the very beginning, but you just need to, keep at it.
Yeah, I think those contacts, find somebody who has a need, and, once you sort of establish that there's a need there, you have to get some sort of a contract written up. That is important to do something formal there. But you can get a lot of help on that from IEEE or other places, consultants networks. Generally, as a consultant, you'll be handed a contract and told sign it rather than, you're being able to write the terms. But, finding somebody who's willing to pay you and who has money, that's the trick. The rest, just work it through as you need to and do good work.
Yeah, if you can pay a lawyer, and I agree with Will, it's tough paying $400 an hour, but it's not a huge amount of time for them to put together a standard professional services agreement for you. And the way our company works is when we approach a client, we go to them with our standard professional services agreement and an associated task order for whatever work they need done. Amen. Initially. And so it's always better if you can go in, start with give them the terms that you want first and let them push back on it, rather than, especially if you're doing business with large companies who have really onerous contracting requirements. If there's any way you can lead with your own form of agreement, it's going to be better for you. Yeah.
Now, the other thing is you may find yourself, I'll say one more thing. You may find that from time to time you have to accept a contract. Someone says, well, we're a big company. We just use our contract. Here you go. And there may be other times where you've got to review a contract or something like that. You do need legal help. You might look at tools like Legal Shield, if any of you are aware of it. It's a subscription legal product that you can get where you pay like $25 or $35 a month or something like that. And essentially you can have contracts reviewed for you just for that. So they'll review the contract and give you a call and go over what the issues might be that you need to go through. Sometimes that is sufficient, but I agree with Mike. As you grow and you should have a standard agreement that you use, and you attach to that a statement of work, and you kind of will work the bugs out of it as you go forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not a ongoing expense once you get the standard form kind of settled.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. And for our audience, just so you have a bit more information, So if you have any questions or if you would like to learn more about the IEEE-USA's consultant network, we have provided a link at the bottom of the screen. IEEE-USA does provide a variety of services and resources for members exploring or engaged in the practice of consulting, which is under the oversight of the AICNCC. It also provides a guide designed to help members who are independent consultants launching their own local consultants network as well. So take a look at that whenever you have the chance. Um, for our next question, Blaine and Jackie Benson asks, what's the best business structure to start out? Sole proprietor, LLC, C Corp, or S Corp? I know you guys have went into that a little bit in earlier questions as well, but just a bit more insight if you
Shall I go first again? So I give a presentation on this, and some of this answer has to do with what you are going to do. If you are going to be a consulting company, where a small independent consulting company, first of all, I would say get started, but I would say being a sole proprietor is not a good way to stay very long, right? An LLC makes a lot of sense for starting out, and I think you can even have a much bigger business as an LLC. They've come a long way, the way that LLCs are organized, limited liability, you can have partners. The structure of them is somewhat roll your own, so you can create a mechanism that works for you and your partners. So there's a good reason for that. A lot of small engineering firms and consulting firms are organized as subchapter S corporations. So they're taxed as a partnership, but they're centrally managed like a corporation. Of course, an LLC can be centrally managed also, but it has the corporate form and the expected sort of structure and reporting processes that are part of a C Corp. And so you'll see a lot of companies that are run by the PEs, and they're at subchapter S, and that's very common structure. Has limitation. They aren't really made to take on very many partners. I think there's a small number of investors and partners that could be part of those organizations, and all the owners have to be human persons, not corporations.
Right.
Okay. So why would you go to so an LLC could be owned by other corporations, or it could be owned by human persons. It doesn't matter. A C Corp can be owned by either as well. And we all know a lot of C Corps that have become public. So I always say when you form a C Corp, you should sort of imagine operating it as if it might be public someday. The reason you might create a C Corp is it can expense more things. A lot of what it does is more structured, so you need to think about how your board will operate. You need to have some structure that goes along with all that. But it's much easier for investors to invest in a C Corp, at least traditionally, because you know exactly what you're buying. And if you need to raise money, say for an invention that you've created that you want to produce or something like that, investors know what they're investing in when they invest in a C Corp. An LLC, as I mentioned, is kind of a roll your own kind of a thing. So it's a little harder for investors to understand what they own. That you can get over that issue, but that's sort of a basic concept. These days, LLCs are being used more and more. But if you want to go public, most times, if you think you might end up there someday, you probably want to be a C Corp.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is both consulting businesses that I've started, we've done as S corps, and that's because the engineering act within the California laws only allows if you're going to offer engineering services, it has to be done, professional engineering services, it has to be done as a corporation. So the difference between the S and the C is really a tax related issue that we don't have time to go into here, but this is probably one of these areas where we can't give you this is the best way. It depends on what you're going to do. It depends on your situation, depends on the state you're in, and it's probably an area where it's worth paying a lawyer, half an hour or an hour to have a discussion with you on it. It can be undone. It could be changed going down the line. It's very common for people to start out as sole proprietors and then incorporate. But
yeah, we went through a transition from an LLC to a corp at some point, and it was doable, but it was somewhat expensive and time consuming and distracting to do. So if you it's easier to start out maybe as an LLC, but sometimes if you end up realizing that you need to be a C, you maybe wish you'd done that to begin with.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Our next question from Ming. Hi, Will. What tip can you provide to clients in not so techie areas like Northern Nevada?
To find clients. Oh, well, again, there is the magic of marketing, right? So one of the things, Gary Blank gives a lot of great talks on this kind of thing. Sometimes you have to do things that the other people aren't doing. I would volunteer for any, certainly technical organizations, but any kind of organization that you can meet people. It's amazing where you find people. If you can offer to help teach a class at a local university, you're going to meet a lot of people that way. You're going to meet the faculty. You're going to meet students that are going to have needs back at their companies, right? There's all sorts of things. If you give presentations on technical areas that you're interested in, you'll find people that are interested in your technical presentation and contact you to help them on those sorts of things. So I would sort of start brainstorming all of these sorts of things. And you can do some of this online as well. Our former chair, Jacob Beningo, has a great example of this. He's collected, I think, a list now of almost 20,000 people that are on his list for embedded software. And he makes presentations and he attends those conferences, and these days you don't have to work just in your local area. You can work all over the place. So the magic is figuring out how to get in front of your customers. No one will buy from you if they don't know you exist.
Yeah, I have a lot of family in Elko, which is Northern Nevada, and there's certain businesses I would not want to start there. Now, that being said, I think the important thing is figuring out who your clients are, who you want them to be. Once you know who you want your clients to be, you got to get in front of them. Now, that may be the local community college, it may be LinkedIn, it may be a lot of emails, but figure out who your clients are and go find them.
Make relationships. People work with the people they know and trust.
Great. Thanks, guys. So our next question, how do you develop business with pre-funded and funded
startups? Okay. I'll try to be short on this one. So I would be very careful about pre-funded, right? Obviously, at least if you wish to get paid. If you're creative and you'd like to participate and you'd like to take some ownership for your participation early on and you can afford to do that, you go, girl, right? And I think I certainly do that from time to time, but it's also true that the more early startups you work with, the more you will find that they have trouble paying you, right? So it's just an issue you have to deal with. And let's face it, a lot of these younger startups, even the funded ones, aren't ultimately going to succeed. So if you take a lot of your compensation either in stock options or warrants or something like that, those may not turn into anything. So you need to make sure you at least cover your hard costs with cash that they're providing you. Don't get farther out over your skis than you can afford to be.
Yeah, I've done a lot of work with startups, and I really enjoy it because I find it's just a neat environment to work in. I also have a lot of value, worthless stock certificates sitting around somewhere. And so, my advice there is, do it. They're great people to work with, but, keep your day job. If you have any sort of Fortune 500 clients or somebody who's willing to, keep the bills paid, pay attention to them too. So I think they're great at a 20% or something like that level. But if you're, I would be really worried about being 100% with those guys. Of course, depends on the contracts.
Thanks, guys. Our next question, how can I present experience and value to a customer when I haven't had any completion of a project as an independent consultant?
Yeah, I think you got to fall back on your employment. Yeah, on your relationships and on your, it doesn't matter that you haven't done something as an independent consultant. if you've done it before, if you know what, if they know what they need and are able to communicate that to you, and you're confident that you can do it, it's not a showstopper that you haven't done it as an independent consultant. So you've got to sell yourself as your experience, probably working for someone else, until you do develop your own portfolio of projects that you've done independently.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like if in any industry, it can be daunting trying to start your own business. So that's why you definitely have to be able to relay what kind of past experience that you've had that might be somewhat similar at least.
I'll say too, it's an odd dichotomy, I think, that everybody's worried so much about their experience, but then and honestly, when people are trying to hire you, they want to know that you can do something, but they're not really that interested in all your experience and what you've done before. It's a funny little tribal dance you have to do to figure out how to convince them that you're confident and that you have enough examples of success in whatever you were doing that it seems plausible. Right.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, guys. So Henry asks, how do you go about qualifying clients to determine objectives and their budget for work performed?
Well, I think this is in a situation where you do probably want to find out, for instance, if you're being solicited by a customer to do work, and do they pay their other clients? You could look and see if that there are complaints against them for not paying, or if you want to be careful about this, though. Nobody wants to be, that you may have situations too where you can do some things to not get too far out over your skis, so that you kind of learn some tactics as you go along. So maybe you want to find out, is this customer able to write checks? Do they know where their checkbook is? Do they know how to write a check? I mean, it sounds silly, right? But when you get a project under contract, well, I've had situations before where you start out, yes, we're going to do this. They're trying to keep you from going away, but they're not really ready. And so they tell you to get started, and then you get started and you send them an invoice and they're like, whoa, wait, hold on, slow down, text, whoa. And you've already done a week of work for them, or 2 weeks of work, or 3 weeks of work. So sometimes you have to find out, sometimes we use a tactic of asking for a small retainer. Maybe it's $500 or $1,000 or something. Do these people know how to write a check? And that check signifies, very clearly says, when you send us the $1,000, we get started, right? And so, I mean, if you do some things like that it's a matter of controlling expectations on everybody's side sometimes. And that's a very practical part of it. The other thing is you may have a limit to how far you'll go. Like, I send you an invoice and you've got 15 days or 30 days or whatever it is. Bigger companies pay over longer periods of time than smaller companies do. But you may say, well, if we go to having an invoice unpaid, well, then I stop until you pay that invoice, right? You can't get yourself in a situation where you've been working your tail off for somebody for 6 months and they haven't paid for most of that time, and you think somehow they're going to come up with cash. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, you really do have to stay on top of your receivables. You can't let that go out too far. And as Will mentioned, you do have some power. You can stop working until they get current with you.
Be courageous about it. I mean, You don't have to be mean. You just have to be clear.
Supposedly, you already have a written agreement where they agreed that they were going to pay your monthly invoices on net 30 terms or something like that. So, if they're meeting what's in your contract, if they're not meeting what's in the contract, it's not being mean or nasty to say, hey, I sent you this invoice and it's 2 months past due. When can I expect to get paid?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing. I've gotten into problems when we talk about a job and I think it's 100 hours and they think it's 10 hours, and then I go and do my 100 hours and they sort of gasp when they see the bill. So that's a bad situation to be in. I think it's really, and I've gotten to be very sort of not formal, but consistent about sort of writing an email saying, you know, I think this is going to take me 10 hours to do. Do you want me to go ahead? And that really helps. And, you know, just make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah, sometimes you have a cap or something.
Yeah.
Another tactic you can do to put in your contract, which I would advise, or modify other people's contracts if you're having to use them, that the ownership of whatever you're working on becomes theirs when they pay you for it. Right? And it's very hard, you know, sometimes you're like, what? Well, you can't do that. Well, are you planning not to pay me? You know, what's going on? And so this is fixed problems in some cases for other, you know, people had you go develop something and they didn't pay you for it, and then they want to have an investor come in and put in a bunch of money into their company, but they still haven't paid you. And the investor comes across your contract and says, hey, this technology is owned by this guy. Why am I talking to you? And you'll get paid.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. Another audience member asks, for non-technical founders, I'm assuming for a consulting business, should they hire a dev team to develop the product, or should they search for a tech co-founder first?
Wow. I think it's important to have a team. Teams are dangerous and difficult sometimes, but it's as a non-technical founder, you know, if you're pretty smart and savvy about what you're trying to accomplish, of course you can do it any way you want. You can find a team that can develop it for you. But if they hand it over to you and you don't really know what you would do with it, and they go off to do something else, are you prepared to engage someone else in it? I think it's a very wise idea to have somebody else who's a partner with you or involved very deeply with you, who understands what it is and can help you develop that technology in a way that you understand it. You know, all situations are different. That would be my advice.
Awesome. Thanks, Will. Amina asks, do any of you have experience with federal grant-based funding for consultancy, and how to build a sustainable income through grant-based work?
God help you. And maybe you guys have a different experience, but I would say if you have a going concern, if everything's going well, your 10 or 15 employees are cranking out, you know, you're all eating food and it's great, right? Then, and you decide, hey, we could do this other thing and we could get a couple $100,000 in grants or something to develop it. And if we don't get the grant, well, we all still eat food, right? I would okay with that if you were asking me, right? But if you are a couple of guys, oh, let's just put in grants and wait till we get some, and then we'll get more grants, that is not going to work, okay? The government works on a geological time scale that you cannot survive through, right? And, you know, I've had situations before where I even won a grant. I won it. That's great. And then they say, well, you can't start yet. Don't start. We can't, if you do anything before we give, you know, all the paperwork's finalized, we can't refund it. And so, you know, in this case, we had a bunch of guys sitting on their hands for 6 months waiting for this freaking grant to have all the paperwork done. And then finally, when they got to the end of it, they were so busy granting other things and doing other things that they exhausted the period of execution. And so they didn't get all the paperwork filled out to the end of the execution. We didn't end up getting the money. I mean, and everybody just ended up being tied to a tree during that, right? That to a small business is horrifying. It is unacceptable, you know.
Yeah, I just wanted to add,
I leave a convention issue.
I've had quite a bit of success with SBIRs, but never as sort of primary funding. They work really well as supplement, and, you know, essentially supplementing my commercial customers as to, you know, hey, you get extra benefit here. They are, at least they were not predictable enough for me so that I could consider that as sort of a primary funding mechanism for a consultancy.
Yeah. Use it as a way to grow in certain areas you're interested in that are optional.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So this next question, and unfortunately due to time constraints, this will be our last question. How did you validate your idea that you could make money doing this? Did you do a business plan?
Oh
I'll go
my
first.
God. Go ahead.
I did not validate the idea, nor did I do a business plan. I just went and started doing it, and haven't done a business plans in 18 years now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the standard business advice is to do a business plan, but as an independent consultant, I essentially set a couple thresholds for myself. Like if I make this much this year, I can keep doing it. If I don't make this much, I'm looking for a job. And, went out and, made my numbers well enough to keep in the business. But, you just can't know. You're selling new stuff as an independent consultant. You're selling yourself, which you haven't done, as much working in another job. So it's really hard to tell how it's going to work out. But have faith in yourself and go for it. And, know when to quit. You don't want to spend your IRA money and, your retirement on consulting.
Right. So I'll come at this from a slightly different direction. Having started a number of companies that are involved in other things or in product development or in other things. And, doing a huge business plan is not worth your time. I absolutely agree with that. However, I do think that you need to get good about evaluating the prospects for the business. You need to, what I say is it a business? And you can start on the back of an envelope, but you probably need to turn it into at least a couple of pages of narrative that explains, what is the market that you're in, who are the major competitors, what are the major competing technologies. You need to probably put together a financial, that at least what I call a cash operating plan, but it's essentially like a kitchen table budget that goes out for 2 years, pretty detailed the first year, and has some clues for the next 2. So you know where it's got to go in order that it's a business that can pay the bills and things it needs to be. This also gets you to find out things like, do I need an office? How much would that cost? How many people am I going to hire? What's it going to cost to have product liability insurance? Oh my gosh, what are the rental rates around here? Oh, I need a truck. How much is a truck? Whatever it might be, right? You actually gets you to flesh all those things out. Now, the other side of this is everything begins with the customer side of things. And you need to come up with the selling points of whatever product you're offering, product or service or whatever it is. And you need to go contact people that might be interested in that and find out if they actually are interested in that. Would they buy this thing? Would they pay this much for it? And before you have anything, before you've done anything, right, you should do that. And you should have a little book of contacts that you've made that give you a sense that you have some people that you might be able to sell this thing to. And that anybody who looks like those people are people you could sell this thing to.
Well, it seems to me the types of things you're talking about, which I agree with for a business developing something or a small business, but right. Not necessarily a consultancy.
That's right. It's a little different than just being a consultant. And I don't know, maybe we should be focusing on consulting here. But but you're sort of in that situation. You're higher up in altitude. You're looking at the world in a little different way if you're looking at it from a product perspective.
Awesome. Well, all right, everyone. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We've had so many great questions from our audience that we were unfortunately not able to get to. If we were not able to get to your question today, feel free to continue posting them in the comment section of our live stream, and we will forward them to our speakers. And based on feedback, hopefully be able to host another webinar like this. Thank you again, Mike, Will, and Chris for joining us today and for giving our audience insight into the consulting world and tips for those wanting to go into consulting.
Thank you.
And we've also provided a link in the comment section to get more information on IEEE-USA's consultant network. It's also on the screen. Thank you everyone for tuning in and for your great questions for our speakers. Check back daily on our social media for future updates, and we hope you all have a great rest of your day.
With the advancement in new technology, the landscape for power systems is changing very rapidly. Information technology has really made a huge difference in enabling some of the things that we work on. I've been able to leverage IEEE-USA to be in the leading edge of my industry. IEEE is all about a sense of community. I am learning ideas and concepts and thinking completely out of the box. IEEE-USA is my competitive edge.